you, ma'am. Um, so we're going to be talking about we've been talking about refuge and its causes. Um, there's different ways of looking at the causes. The traditional, they say, is fear and faith, but I think in the way I personally see it at this point, it's more like instead of fear, the way I see my taking refuge is I have set a direction that I'm going in, and I want to keep that direction going. So I continue taking refuge, following the Dharma, just so that I establish the karmic pattern to be able to continue with the Dharma. In the initial scope, they'll say fear, and that may be appropriate for someone. Oh, if you think of say someone who's just following, who's got a very rough life, maybe a villager in a country in India somewhere, who doesn't study the Dharma that much, but just looks to someone like the Dalai Lama as, please help me, right? And so they want to have a good rebirth. They don't want to have a bad rebirth. They don't want to have another life of suffering. So in an initial scope mindset, fear would make sense. Concern about what your next lifetime is going to be, and it also should make sense for all of us. What's going to happen? Where is our karma going to take us? After we leave this body and go into a new experience, whatever that may be. So, and then the other one being faith in the Buddhist teachings, in the inspiration from the Buddha, how the Dharma can change our minds. And all that faith comes through our own personal conviction when we've tried it out. And we see that, the Dharma is working. We can see that it can make a difference in our afflictive emotions. It can make a difference in how angry we get, what our responses are. And as we see that those differences taking shape in our life, then we develop confidence in the Dharma as a path, in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. So those were the causes. Then we've talked about the objects of refuge, and now we're on the third section called measuring the extent to which we've taken refuge, or in other words, how to take refuge. How do you do it? One translation of refuge from Alexander Berzin, which is a very good translation, is safe direction. Safe direction to take in your life. When you're taking refuge, you're taking a safe. Yeah. So in your existence, yeah. So when we're taking a safe direction for our life in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, we're making a decision. We are making the decision. And I said this last week, that out of all the infinite possibilities that exist in all the realms of the universes and however it is they exist, out of all those possibilities, which samsara is one of those possibilities, we're experiencing it. We're making a choice to choose a kind of how would you put it? Almost like a protective conduit, that's going to take us through where we are now, all the way to enlightenment, and keep all of the other crazy stuff that can go on in this infinite universe of possibilities. Keep that from taking us off the path. So we're taking a safe direction, sort of I like the image of a conduit, a protective conduit that you travel through to get to the goal you're after. So we consciously choose that, and it will guide us safely and surely to liberation and universal happiness. So one way to take refuge in the three jewels is to know their qualities, and so we've been talking about those. We've identified the qualities of the Buddha Dharma Sangha in terms of their conventional and ultimate appearances, and ultimate natures. So I'll just quickly go over that. The conventional Buddha refuge, or safe direction, they are the Buddha's form bodies, the bodies that we can see, The ultimate Buddha refuge or safe direction is the mind of a Buddha and the emptiness of inherent existence of that mind. With the conventional Dharma refuge, we're taking safe direction in the 84,000 spoken teachings that were given by the Buddha. And then the ultimate refuge, ultimate Dharma refuge, are the what they call the true cessations and true paths on the mind of an Arya noble being. In other words, when somebody attains the state of an Arya bodhisattva, and they have had a direct realization of emptiness, and they have generated bodhicitta, well, then these true paths are the Dharma that is on their mind stream, the Dharma that they have realized, those realizations. And the true cessations are the cessations of all of the attachment and the afflictive emotion, attachment, aversion, and all those afflictive emotions, and the ignorance which is at their root. So those are called the true cessations. So we're taking refuge in that, that's the ultimate Dharma refuge, is that we want to go there ourselves. And so we're taking refuge in beings who have achieved that, have realizations on the path, and these cessations on their mind stream of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And then the conventional Sangha refuge, and Sangha is a word that roughly translates as community. So the traditional Sangha refuge, again, is any individual Arya noble being who has realized emptiness. There's also a community of 4 monks or nuns, which are a symbolic representation of the conventional refuge. But what we're really taking refuge in is some being that has had those realizations. And then the ultimate Sangha refuge is, you could say, the community or gathering of true paths and true cessations on the mind of an Arya noble being. Yeah. So, really, the ultimate conventional Dharma refuge and the ultimate conventional Sangha refuge are the same. They're the true paths and true cessations on the mind stream of an Arya noble being who has realized emptiness. Then we also talked about 3 kinds of confidence: admirational, we admire the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Then there is aspirational. Once we have, seen what those qualities are, we aspire, to attain those qualities ourselves. And then there is convictional confidence, where when we actually begin to attain some of those qualities, we can see that we can actually do that, and we gain conviction. So those are the 3 types of confidence. And we've all experienced that in whenever we've taken something on, any kind of goal that we've had in our life, professionally or spiritually or artistically or whatever it may be. We go through these steps. We admire what the thing is that we're trying to achieve. We aspire to get there, and then we gain conviction by actually beginning to accomplish it. And an important part of that I keep stressing, and it's super important, is we have to have this kind of enthusiasm about what we're doing. This enthusiastic effort. If you can think of any kind of project you've done like this, any project you've engaged in where you admired something, and then you aspired to be able to do it, and then you started to be able to do it, and you got the conviction, like, wow, I can do this. I'm painting the walls the color I wanted them to be. Isn't this great? You have to have enthusiasm to stick with it. And it's exactly the same with Buddhism. This is why one of the paramitas is called joyful, enthusiastic effort. It's necessary throughout the entire path. We have to have that. And this is also, we'll do this when we do a meditation at the end, but this is very similar to, this is the essence of what Tantra is. Tantra is that you visualize, visualize where you want to be, the thing you want to do. So in this case, in Tantra, they're talking about visualizing wanting to become an enlightened being. So you visualize that, you sort of have you study all the qualities of it, you gain admiration for it, you visualize it, you put yourself in that position, and then you sort of project what you would be like in the future if you could do that, and then you take the steps step by step to get there, and you gradually gain confidence that, wow, maybe I actually could do this, because I'm seeing the changes occur within my own mind stream, you know. So this goes back to, I talked about two types of refuge last time, which is, um, what do they call it? Let me see. Causal and resultant refuge. So the causal is, you know, the Buddhas, the Dharma, the Sangha that we know about. The resultant refuge is the Buddha that we will become, the realizations on the Dharma realizations on our mind stream that we will have, and the beings that we will become, like we'll become an Arya Bodhisattva, who can be a refuge for others. We will become those things. So what we do is we begin to visualize that, and we're taking refuge in that. You know, we're taking refuge in the mind stream that we will become. So I put together a meditation for that we'll do at the end of this session. So what is a Buddha? So if we're going to know about the qualities of the Buddha, we have to know what a Buddha is. So let's just go right to the word Buddha and the Sanskrit meaning of the word Buddha. It means awakened and enlightened, one who has achieved perfect knowledge of all that can be perceived or grasped by the mind. One who has achieved perfect knowledge of all that can be perceived or grasped by the mind. So if you look at, Venerable Ravina does this, and it's just great. If you look at the syllables, the two syllables of the word Buddha, Bud and Da. Bud refers to awakening from the deep sleep of ignorance. So it's an awakening, but what are you awakening from? Awakening from the deep sleep of ignorance. And what that implies is that you are awakening from all of the things that arise from that ignorance. So these, we've always talked about this. The afflictive emotions, all of the attachment, all of the ignorance, all of the aversion, all of that arises from an ignorance about the way things actually exist. So we think things exist separately, you know, in space in between them, and therefore we develop an idea of a separate self, a separate ego. So our separate ego, and this is all ignorance, our separate ego then looks out at various things and develops attachment for them. Like, I need to have this to be happy. I need to have this person to be happy. I need to have this particular thing to be happy. And it never lasts. It never works, because it's a mistaken view of the way things are. And so what happens is we wind up needing more and more and more of the thing that we think is going to make us happy, or the thing that we think is going to make us happy, or the person that's going to make us happy doesn't work for us anymore. You know, it's not enough. They're not who they thought we were, or they're not giving us what we thought they were going to give us. And so these afflictive emotions arise. And when our attachment doesn't get what it wants, when the thing we're looking for, we don't get it, that's what causes aversion. That's what causes fear. That's what causes anger. That's what causes anxiety. That's what causes depression, guilt, you name it. All these aversion types of afflictive emotions all arise because our attachment isn't getting what it wants. So this is all part of what's in the word Buddha, in the name Buddha, because this ignorance that the Buddha has awakened from implies all ego self-grasping, all fear, all craving desire, all neuroses, anxiety, depression, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem. In short, the utter uprooting of all afflictive emotions. When one has awakened from the ignorance, you know, this ignorance, it implies the utter uprooting of all afflictive emotions. So this is what the first syllable of the Buddha means. You know, the Buddha has uprooted all afflictive emotions. So then the second syllable, Da, second syllable refers to a mind that has blossomed like a lotus flower to the knowledge of all things. A mind that has sort of blossomed like a lotus flower.
So Da is the blossom.
Da is the blossom, Bud is the awakening. Awakening from ignorance, and Da is blossoming into the knowledge of all things. So this implies all of the wonderful qualities that we're all looking for, you know? I mean, love, kindness, joy, compassion, wisdom, self-confidence, patience, generosity, all the things that we recognize are good and that we want. This is coming from this awakening to the knowledge of all things. So that's what Buddha means. This is what Buddha is all about. So the Buddha also has found from direct experience that all of these afflictive emotions and all of this ignorance is not, how would you put it? They're not foundational to our nature. They are what they say in Buddhism. They're adventitious. They're sort of added on. They're not foundational. Like the way they describe it is, if you had perfect, beautiful, clear water, but it was polluted. That pollution is not foundational to the essence of water. That pollution, if you find the right kind of filters, the right kind of ways to remove that pollution, you can remove all of that pollution, but you have not, and that was all adventitious to what the water was. It was added on to the water. So the water is like our pure mind, the pure state of what we can be. And we have all of these afflictive emotions due to ignorance, muddying up the whole deal. All of that can be removed.
And it's the state that we are. I mean, when you say the state that we can't be,
It's the
yeah. The state that we are, we just don't know, we don't have awareness of all the pollution.
Yeah. And Merritt's saying it's the state that we are, but we're not aware of it. And that is true. I mean, that's what they say is our Buddha nature. We have that Buddha nature, but we're sort of deceived about what's going on. And so we have fallen into this trap. We've fallen into this cyclical trap, and we need to sort of awaken from it and take the steps that are needed to sort of get ourselves out of it. And the Buddha is basically saying this can be done. I did it, you can do it. But the important aspect here is that we, each one of us, has to do it. Nobody can wave a magic wand and do it for us. I mean, I've always said if they could, they would have. It would have been done already. If God could have done it, God would have done it. If Jesus could have done it, he would have done it. If the Buddha could have done it, the Buddha would have done it. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, even if you look at your own situations with family members or children or something like that, no matter how hard you may try or want to help them or fix their problem, you can't do it. They have to do it for themselves. You can support them, you can give them guidance, you can give them, and you can help them in any way you can, but they're the ones who have to make the change. And it's the same for all of us. We're the ones who have to do it. And the conclusion I've come to is this must be something in the nature of what interdependence is, which is why in Buddhism they say interdependence doesn't mean we're all one consciousness. It's more like we're all aspects of consciousness that are sort of individualized but connected. And so we're all realizing one another and what's going on. And it's a way of, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. It's similar to, I looked into Gnosticism for a while when I was studying ancient Middle Eastern type religions. And Gnosticism has a very similar kind of view. They say that, but they talk about it in terms of, God. And so they say that God is like this, it's sort of like a sphere, right? And all of these consciousnesses are coming out of this one sphere, but they're all interconnected. They're all connected, and they all have to understand and relate with one another, like an ecosystem. Yes. I mean, if you look around, that's the way everything kind of works. When it's working, that's how it works. Well.
And that's why you have the mindset of, I'm going to get it right. So you guys do what you want, but I'm going.
Right.
That's great, except for
right.
We're all connected.
Yeah.
So
Merritt's saying when we have a mindset that I'm going to get enlightened, I'm going to get enlightened, but and this is something that happens in some forms of Buddhism. It's this idea that I'm going to get enlightened. It's sort of like stop the world, I want to get off, right? And I'm going to get enlightened. But in terms of what interdependence is, the Mahayana view makes so much more sense to me, because the Mahayana view is saying, well, that's not the way it actually works. You know, yes, you can get enlightened, but that's just one aspect of this whole interdependent system. So you want to, and you're part of that. So of course you want to help every other part of that reach those same realizations and reach enlightenment. It only makes sense to me. And it seems a heck of a lot more interesting to me too, than just sort of going into some kind of solitary nirvana, lights out kind of thing. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't even make sense to me when I actually think about it. So that is what a Buddha is. So another thing we discussed is that the Buddha's body, speech, and mind are one entity. They're an appearance of the Buddha's mind, and they're completely integrated. Their bodies are reflections of their mental states that karmically correspond to what sentient beings are capable of benefiting from. So so how is that possible? So this is how we got into the whole discussion of the mind-only school. The highest school is the highest school in Buddhism is the Prasangika Madhyamika, which is it's a middle way. But it doesn't mean the way these tenets work. You know, you have two sets of tenets which really are about being liberated from samsara, and then the third and fourth tenets are about enlightenment. You know, so you have obscurations we talked about last week, obscurations to liberation and obscurations to enlightenment. The first thing that comes that you get rid of are the obscurations to liberation, and then you go to the obscurations to enlightenment. So the tenets are sort of like an onion, and as you keep peeling away the layers of the onion, you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the meaning. It's not that the other schools are mistaken, they just don't have the layers of meaning that the final ultimate school has. So this view of mind only is not mistaken, other than they say everything, we talked about this, everything is just an appearance of the mind. It doesn't exist outside as a separate entity from the mind that is observing what's outside. All that is, according to Buddhism, that's fine, dandy, true. Where the mistake comes in the Chittamatra school is they say, but the mind that all this appearance is occurring to, the mind exists inherently. And the ultimate view is nothing exists inherently. Nothing exists concretely from its own side, independently. The mind is not like that. The mind itself is a series of moments that are one moment it's a dependent arising. In other words, what previous moment of the mind is the cause of this moment of the mind, which is the cause of the next moment of the mind, which is the cause. The mind is not static. It's not stuck. When I was talking last week about the very tiny glimpse that I had, we were doing Mahamudra meditations out under the tree. I know Merritt and Tracy, you probably remember. And the very tiny glimpse that occurred to me was sort of like this Chittamatra experience, where I stopped actually seeing the outer appearances. They were starting to just go away. Even with my eyes open, things were sort of going white, you know? And another thing that occurred was that it was impossible for me to have a conceptual thought. It was just sort of like whatever that mechanism was completely blocked off or something. It was impossible. It just wasn't happening. But what I was experiencing was this sense of vibrant awareness that just kept expanding. So it was not static. It was just like growing, just expanding constantly, like a never-ending fountain. So that, to me, is a glimpse of what the mind or consciousness is. It's not, and this is why they say it doesn't exist inherently, because inherently means it's it is not a dependent arising, which sort of means it's kind of stuck. It's concretized. When something, and basically nothing is like that. Nothing. That's an impossible way for anything to exist. Nothing exists that way. But, it takes a lot to have a realization of that. So we talked about this mind-only school and how appearances, how the world we see is really a set of, it's sort of like holographic appearances that appear to our five sense reality, the body that we have. So our five senses can only see a very, very limited frequency of light, of sound, of touch, whatever, the basic five senses, very limited frequencies. So what we see appears to be solid concrete objects out there that exist separately and independently, separated by space. But in reality, that's not the way it is at all. So this begins to explain why a Buddha can appear in various ways. If you think of the movie The Matrix, I talked about this also, how the agents, and of course this movie is not a complete analogy, perfect analogy, but the agents were able, because they were sort of controlling this view that people were having. The agents were able to just pop in and out, take different forms, do whatever they needed to do, to get whatever they wanted to get done. And it was finally when Neo, the main character in the story, had a realization of what actually was going on, that it wasn't actually an appearance out there, it was an appearance in the mind, and he sort of had an enlightenment kind of experience and was able to then overcome all of that, see through it. So this is what has happened with an omniscient mind. A Buddha's body, like I was saying, it's completely integrated. The body, speech, mind, they're all one thing. It is not, when a Buddha appears, it would appear to be a physical being, and then a Buddha can appear as any kind of being and any kind of object that will be beneficial karmically to who they're trying to help. So when a Buddha appears as a human being, it's not actually the human being, the kind of human being that we think of, made of atoms and subatomic particles. It is completely made of consciousness, but is appearing as it is made of atoms and subatomic particles. And this is we just have to stretch our minds here. We have to take on board as a hypothesis that, well, maybe this is possible, because there are definitely things going on in science now that are sort of backing this kind of theory up. So it's something to think about. We don't have to say that's the way it is, but it certainly is something we should be thinking about. And it's certainly something that Buddhism talks about. And they were talking about this centuries ago. So our bodies so everything in our five sense reality is wave field of information. Our bodies are information fields, and so is everything we think we see, hear, touch, smell, taste, right? Our limited five senses decode specific frequency bandwidths of information in the waveform fields through the antenna we call the eyes, ears, nose, skin, tongue, and transforms them into electrical signals which are communicated to the brain. This in turn decodes the electrical information into digital and holographic information that we experience as a physical external world of objects separated by empty space, when in fact there is no external world as we perceive it. This is the Chittamatra view. It's also a quantum view now. It's happening now. Scientists are talking about this. So a Buddha is an omniscient being that is able to perceive all the information fields and all of the frequencies, and can manipulate those fields and frequencies to generate the appearance of any form that will karmically benefit or correspond to what any given sentient being is capable of benefiting from. So that's a very different way to think of how the Buddha can manifest, how the qualities of the Buddha can manifest to help sentient beings. And we'll talk about this more when we get into the Buddha's stories. So we also talked about why the Buddha is a suitable refuge. The Buddhas are free from all fears. And I mentioned last week, well, all fears that exist are contained within samsara, are contained within this delusional kind of trap that sentient beings find themselves in. So the Buddha is free from all those fears. The fear of samsara, the Buddha is liberated from it, completely liberated from it, and can pop in and out and, you know, do whatever a Buddha needs to do. Also, a Buddha can spontaneously manifest in multiple forms in various realms, or what we would call realms. This also explains, you know, this Chittamatra view also explains the, you know, the realms where we think of there, you know, there's some place out there. There are different places, and when in fact they're nowhere but in the mind. These realms are nowhere but in the mind. They karmically correspond to the frequency or the state that the mind is at. So the world that we're experiencing now, this conventional reality that we're experiencing, it karmically corresponds to the frequency or state of mind that we're all at. If we were at a higher frequency, we would be experiencing something different, or a lower frequency, we would be experiencing something different. And this occurs even right on this planet. I mean, you can see it's like other worlds for some people, some groups of people. It's a completely different world they're experiencing. I mean, some of it is just awful, really terrible. I mean, it might as well be a hellworld, you know? So that's one of the qualities, that he's free from the fears. The other fear, other than the fear of samsara, and we talked about this, and this is important to get a grasp on too, which is why I'm repeating all this stuff, because we sort of have to take this thread, we have to carry it with us through these stages of the path. So the Buddha is free from the fear of nirvana. And nirvana is a word, Sanskrit word, that means literally it's like to blow out, like if you were blowing out the flame of a candle, to blow it out. You're blowing out the fuel that creates the fire, you know. And another way to say nirvana is cessation. And this is one of the things that are in the four noble truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path to cessation of that suffering. So this word nirvana has come to mean, you know, some kind of blissful, peaceful, wonderful state, which we're not saying that it's not, but nirvana is a state that is different. It's not quite taking you all the way to enlightenment. And so with the Theravada view, for instance, nirvana is, they say that someone who has achieved arhatship, an arhat, this is different than an arya being. An arhat is someone who has not from the beginning of their path generated this bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to become a Buddha, to be of benefit to all sentient beings. So an arhat you can have a realization of emptiness and not have the altruistic intention, apparently, because you can be liberated. I mean, if you have the right qualities, if you have ethics is extremely important, meditative concentration and wisdom, realizing emptiness, you can achieve liberation from samsara. That's the formula. It doesn't say anything about, you know, bodhicitta or the altruistic intention to become enlightened. So in the Theravada view, you develop your ethics to perfection, you develop your meditative concentration to perfection, and you then have a realization of emptiness, and you are liberated from samsara. But they call it a nirvana without remainder. You know, it's sort of like lights out. When in the Theravada view, it's kind of like lights out. An arhat can achieve arhatship in their human lifetime, just like a Buddha can achieve enlightenment in their human lifetime. But when they pass into what they call pari-nirvana, when the body dies, then according to the Theravada view, it's just kind of, you know, the consciousness is just in how they put it is in a state that they can't even put into words, but it is a absolute thing, but they're not at all connected to samsara and the world or anything like that. So it's kind of like I talked about this last week, the analogy they use is like an arhat is sort of like a being that has, liberated from samsara, but they're asleep on the beach while the, samsara is churning out there in the ocean, and the Buddhas are, trying to help everybody get released from that. So eventually they say the arhat has to be sort of reawakened and told about, the nature of interdependence and the bodhicitta path that they have to take. And so they sort of have to start over with the bodhicitta intention. So that is a fear that a Buddha is completely free from, a fear of falling into that kind of state of solitary nirvana, or nirvana without remainder, is kind of they sometimes say. So now we get into these Buddha stories, because Buddhists have the second reason why a Buddha is a suitable refuge is they have skillful and effective means to free others from all fears. So they can help others in accordance with, they can help us in accordance with our own karmic tendencies, our own mental inclinations, and our own dispositions. Because a Buddha is omniscient, they can see all of that. They can size someone up immediately and know exactly where they're at and what would be the best way to help them. And some of these stories are going to demonstrate that. So the first story is about the Buddha helping someone who is, painfully, benightedly ignorant, right? And this is the story of Little Path, which in Sanskrit, the word is Chuda Pantaka. Chuda means small, Pantaka means path, little path. So Little Path, Chuda Pantaka, he was the son of a Brahmin, which is one of the Hindu religions. Or is it? I think it's something in India, right? He was son of a Brahmin. It was sort of a priestly caste. And he was the younger brother of Big Path. Big Path was Maha, like Mahayana, great. Maha Pantaka. Maha, Chuda Pantaka, Little Path, Maha Pantaka, Big Path. So his big brother was Big Path. And they were part of the Pantaka family, right? And they, Chuda Pantaka, Maha Pantaka, Mama Pantaka, and Papa Pantaka. Yeah, and then, Mahapantaka was quite the scholar, and they lived in the area of India that's right at the northern border, right on the border of Nepal, which is where close to where the Buddha's where he came from, the palace that where he grew up. And so the Buddha had in that area, the Buddha had a sort of a meditation temple, as a lot of monks who were followers, and they had a whole little compound called the Jetavana Grove. Well, Pantaka, I don't know, but that was the family who lived near there, right? So they're in the Jetavana Grove, which is very beautiful. It still exists today, and they have the ruins are there of the temples and the various huts and buildings that the monks lived in, and it's quite pretty because there are lots of mango. There's a whole mango grove around there, and there are beautiful shade trees all over the place. Amina was there; she took pictures and sent us. So Mahapantaka, big path. He was a scholar, and he became ordained, and he became a monk, and he was staying at Jetavana Grove among the monks with the Buddha. And Chuda, little Path, was still going to school, right, or trying to go to school, but his teachers finally kicked him out because they said, this kid can't learn anything. I mean, it was as if Little Path had some kind of, what we would say today is some severe form of learning disability, like, intense ADD, or I don't know what, something that so like the teacher would tell him one syllable, and Little Path could say that syllable of a word, say it was like brother, right? So the teacher could go, it's bra, Little Path would go bra, and the teacher would then go there, and Little Path would go there. And so he said, now do the both two syllables together, and Little Path couldn't remember the first one. And when he remembered the first one, he couldn't remember the second one. It was impossible to teach him. So Little Path's parents died. So he was left an orphan. So the Jetavana Grove was near where they lived. So Big Path asked Little Path to come, he could stay with him at Jetavana Grove, and he would ordain him and he would train him to be a monk and all of this kind of stuff. So his Big Path is trying to teach Little Path and train him, and it was impossible. Little Path couldn't do it. I mean, he couldn't remember one word of Dharma that had more than a syllable, right? So finally, Big Path just kicked him out. He didn't know what to do with him. And so the Buddha was walking by, and he found Little Path sitting on the temple steps crying. And he said, what's wrong? And Little Path is saying, I'm so stupid. I can't remember anything. I can't do anything. Nobody wants me. So the Buddha says, I think I can help you. And he decided that he would teach him. So he said, can you remember abandoned dirt, abandoned stains? But it was too much. He said he wanted Little Path to remember these words: abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. But it was too much. Little Path couldn't do it. So then the Buddha said, okay, do you think you could clean the sandals and shoes of the monks? And Little Path said, oh, yes, oh monk, I can do that. I can clean their shoes. He said, then clean the monks' sandals and shoes. So the Buddha then told the monks, he says, you have to let Little Path do this. It's his job to clean your sandals and shoes. And every time he cleans your shoes, say to him, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. Abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. So Little Path is cleaning their shoes all day. And all day he's hearing the monks say, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. Little Path, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. Yeah, so because he couldn't even remember that much, right? So he had to hear it over and over and over and over, the repetition.
But he's also doing something. So
And he's doing something.
He's an active process.
Yeah, he's in a process of cleaning the shoes. And they made sure the shoes always were dirty and they had to clean them. And I guess Jetavana Grove was, muddy and stuff like that. So finally, and the Buddha told the monks, you have to do this because he has to purify his karma. He's got this bad karma where he can't remember anything. So you have to do this. So the monks did this, and eventually Little Path could remember abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. And once he had learned this recitation, the Buddha then says to him, okay, you don't have to polish their shoes anymore. Now what I want you to do is do this recitation while you sweep the temple courtyard. Because, there are lots of trees and leaves and everything needed to be swept all the time. So Little Path did this with perseverance. He was sweeping and sweeping. So he'd sweep one side of the courtyard and he would say, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. And then he'd go and sweep the other side of the courtyard and go, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains, abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. By the time he'd swept one side of the courtyard, the other side was dirty again. So he was constantly doing this back and forth, doing an action and saying these words over and over again. He spent years going back and forth, okay, cleaning the two sides of the courtyard, constantly saying abandoned dirt, abandoned stains. Then the thought finally came to him when the Buddha said abandoned dirt, abandoned stains, because he was sort of probably hearing some of the teachings going on in the temple. So he's saying when the Buddha said abandoned dirt and abandoned stains, did he mean internal or external dirt? And then into his mind, probably this is from the influence of the Buddha, sort of popped these three verses that he'd never heard before. And these were the verses. Here, dirt is attachment, not dirt. Dirt is a name for attachment, not dirt. Scholars reject this kind of dirt. They scrupulously follow the Buddha's teachings. Here, dirt is hostility, not dirt. Dirt is a name for hostility, not dirt. Scholars reject this kind of dirt. They scrupulously follow the Buddhist teachings. Here, dirt is ignorance, not dirt. So basically what he was doing is he was talking about ignorance, attachment, and aversion. Ignorance, attachment, and hostility. This is what needs to be abandoned. It needs to abandon the ignorance that's the root of attachment and aversion. So eventually, because Little Path offered this service in this way, through the powering of offering these service and generating confidence in the Buddha, he began to realize that abandon dirt meant eliminate all of the ignorance, anger, and attachment from the mind, eliminate all the subtle stains on the mind, eliminate the appearance of true existence, the thing we've been talking about, the way things appear to actually exist. This was all happening to Little Path, who had been so, so impossible to teach before, right? And so he began to realize what all of this had meant. And by contemplating this more and more, he eventually attained liberation over time. So this was the Buddha's skillful way of helping this, he had been a child, impossible to teach, and eventually became full of knowledge and was able to be liberated from samsara. So now we go on to a story of the Buddha helping someone who has a lot of anger. And this is the story of Angulimala. Let me see, I want to find this, make sure I get all the details right.
I'm just gonna say probably the upside down person is something we definitely get to during this class.
Yeah.
That's like.
Well, everybody, we all have a little
We
bit of
all
both.
ask the Buddha, so omniscient, why can't he help me?
Huh? Oh yeah, right.
So you,
Yeah, I talked about that last week. We'll talk about it again.
I know, but
Yeah.
it's sort of the point.
All right, so this is a story of Angulimala. Let me find the actual, I want to make sure I get all of these details right. Okay, so Angulimala was born in Savatthi, which was also near in the northern, near the Nepali border of India, and was in a kingdom called Kosala, which was near where the Buddha was. So Angulimala was born into, he had a father who was a Brahmin priest, again, priestly caste. So he, his father and mother were both Brahmins. His father was sort of what would you call, he was like the chaplain or the spiritual advisor to the king of Kosala. So when Angulimala was born to his father and mother, there were these ominous signs in the sky. There was a constellation that was a constellation of a bandit, and there was lightning in the sky, and they saw it as if weapons were flashing. And so this seemed like this was not a good omen when Angulimala was born. So his father, the spiritual advisor to the king, was talking to the king about this. And the king of Kosala is saying, well, do these omens say that he will be a lone bandit, or is he going to be the head of a band of bandits? And the father said, well, the omen says that it's a lone bandit. And he said, and so the king said, well, okay, then we'll let him live. Otherwise, they were going to kill him, right? Which is pretty bad. I guess they did stuff like that in those days. So instead, his father then named him, well, they hadn't named him yet, actually. They had not named him yet. So his father named him Ahimsaka, which means non-violence. It means non-violence, or another way would say the harmless one. So he named him Ahimsaka. So Ahimsaka grew up, and they say that he was very intelligent, very handsome. And his father then sent him to study with a Brahmin guru type of guy, a spiritual mentor Brahmin. So he was this handsome young man, intelligent, good-natured, apparently, and he goes to study with this teacher, and he excelled in his studies. He was very good, and he became the teacher's, the guru's favorite student. So favorite that he was allowed access into the teacher's house and his quarters and could study there. And so the other students became quite jealous of Hamsika. And they made up the story that Hamsika was making moves on the Brahmin's wife. Another version of this story says that the Brahmin's wife was making moves on Hamsika because he was so handsome. So we don't know exactly which is which. But in any case, the word got to the king that Hamsika was, maybe messing around with his wife, which Hamsika never was doing. So he says, Hamsika says that he wanted to be ordained. And the guru says, well, yes, you can do this, but you have to do one thing for me first. You have to do, and this was quite common, you would have to do a particular service for your guru before you get ordained. But this guru guy was not the best of gurus. And so what he told Hamsika was that he needed to bring him 1,000 fingers from cut off from people, 1,000 fingers. And the reason he told him this, and then he said, and if you do this, then you will have realizations, you can be ordained. And so Hamsika's going, I guess so. He had a lot of faith in this guru, and this says something about how we should look at our gurus, right? So Hamsika goes out to do this. But what the king was doing is he was thinking, okay, this kid is never, he's going to get killed along the way. As soon as he tries to, get these fingers off of people, I mean, he's going to be attacked, he'll be killed, and I won't have to deal with him and, screwing around with my life anymore. So Hamsika goes out to a place in the woods, and he sort of lives on a cliff looking over a roadway that goes through the woods in that area. And there are several villages around there, and people travel through this roadway all the time. So he's out there, spying on people. And when he sees somebody coming by alone, or if he feels he can overtake them, he overtakes them. And most of the time he has to kill them to cut their finger off. And so what happens, as with anything we do repetitively, and he had a motivation to do it. And apparently also, there was a karmic propensity to kill that was sort of triggered by this. So the more, with any afflictive emotion, the more we engage in that afflictive emotion, whether it be lying, stealing, killing, the more we engage in any afflictive emotion, the stronger it gets. It becomes like a habit, like an addiction. And this is what, so he had to kill 1,000 people to do this, right? So he's cutting off all of these fingers, killing all of these people, but it's getting, this addiction to kill is getting stronger and stronger in Angulimala. And so the people, Hamsika. And so the people then, I mean, he becomes well known as this fierce guy who's like killing people and cutting their fingers off. And so they call, he was initially hanging the fingers from threads from the trees, but the birds were eating the skin off of the fingers, the flesh off the fingers. So what he did was he took the fingers and he strung them together like a necklace, a mala, like the mala. So they called him Anguli, finger, which means finger, mala, finger necklace, because he then wore this necklace of fingers, rotting fingers and finger bones and all this stuff, and he was killing people, right? So people were then deserting their villages, because at night he would go into the villages and get people and kill them. He just became ruthless, like a serial killer, It just grew and grew and grew. It was fierce in it. So this, the word gets back to the king that there is this fierce killer out there, and they're calling him Angulimala. So the king, and Angulimala had by this time killed 999 people to get these fingers. He only had one more finger to go to have his 1,000-finger necklace so that he could be ordained and have realizations, right? So he has one more person.
Who was his teacher?
His teacher was this Brahmin guy. His teacher was not a follower of the Buddha. But his teacher admired the Buddha. Or the king did, I should say. I'm sorry, the king did. So the king sends like a bunch of guards, like a small army out to kill this guy. Because people have said, well, he sort of hangs out in this particular road by this cliff, and this is where you probably are going to find him. So the king is sending the guards out to kill him. His mother and father hear about this. They hear that the villagers are going to kill this guy who's, Amsika's, Angulimala's mother and father hear about it. And his mother is like beside herself. They're going to kill him. I have to go out. I have to find him. I have to warn him. He has to get away. It's his mother, it's her son. She doesn't remember him being this violent person. She remembers him being this nice, handsome, smart kid. So she starts running, making her way, and it's not that far, making her way through the villages to the area in the woods where Angulimala is going to be. So the Buddha becomes aware of this, his omniscient mind. He sees that the mother is running towards Angulimala. Angulimala has one more finger to go. And the Buddha sees, if I don't stop this, he's going to kill his mother. He will kill his mother to get that final finger on the necklace. So the Buddha makes his way out to the area where Angulimala is, just as his mother is coming. And Angulimala is thinking that he will kill his mother. But then he sees the Buddha and says, no, I'm going to kill this guy instead. I'll kill him. He looks pretty harmless, So he starts to run towards the Buddha with his, knife or whatever he's got. And he's running as fast as he can, but the Buddha is just barely walking. And Angulimala can't catch up with him. And he's, running, and the Buddha's just barely walking. And so what they say in this story, and this goes back to the Chittamatra view, or an omniscient mind being able to manipulate the fields and the frequencies, right? What they say in this story is what the Buddha did. He had what they call a siddhi. It's sort of like a siddhi is a supernatural power. And what the Buddha was doing was expanding the ground, the area between him. He just kept expanding it between him and Angulimala. So the Buddha hardly had to walk at all. But Angulimala is running and running and running, but this distance is just getting further and further and further because he's just expanding the field, right? So finally, Angulimala goes, stop, not stop, I want to kill you, but just stop, And so the Buddha turns around, and all of a sudden, boom, he's right there in front of the Buddha. And the Buddha says, I have stopped. And he says, what I've stopped is all of my, ignorance. I've stopped all of my anger and attachment and fear. And I have gained realizations, and I have, and basically was telling him who he was. And Angulimala could see this was a great spiritual teacher. So right then and there, Angulimala sort of gets it and stops and says, I want to follow you. I want to follow you. I want to be your disciple. So the Buddha says, okay, you can be my disciple. Come along. And so of course, the king and the guards and the whole town, the villagers, they're all after Angulimala. But the Buddha tells the king, let him stay with me. He's going to be a monk. If you see that he's a monk and he stays with me, you can leave him alone. And the king, out of respect for the Buddha, says, okay, if you got him, you can keep him. As long as he doesn't come back, we will leave him alone. So then what happened is Angulimala studied and practiced, and he excelled, and he had to go through intense purification, karmic purification. And he did suffer. When he was out, begging for alms and stuff, the people could recognize him and they beat him, and they didn't kill him, but he suffered a lot, but not as much as he would have if he had gone ahead and killed his mother, which is one of those heinous crimes. They say you go directly to the lowest hell realm if you do that, or your mind experiences the lowest hell realm if you do that. And the Buddha saw that, so that he was keeping him from killing his mother. So Angulimala was eventually able to overcome, to purify all of that karma. And so his suffering was less than it would have been had he killed his mother and gone to a lower realm. And eventually he too was able to reach high levels of realization. So that is one of the most famous of the Buddha stories, in that it offers hope for people who have really done some pretty nasty things. That this karma, any karma, there is no karma that cannot be purified. No karma that cannot be purified. Why it's important for us to practice karmic purification. It's in those, one of those kinds of practices is in the preparatory practices under the confession part, where you purify your negative karma. So that's the story of Angulimala. Now we're going to go to a story of someone who had, oh wow, oh yeah, this is Nanda, his brother. This is a story of someone who had, I mean, severe attachment. I mean, we're talking severe lust, right? I mean, a real problem. So the Buddha, the Buddha's, when he was a prince living in, what was the place? I think it was Kalivastu or something like that. Kapilavastu was the name of the kingdom that his father had. And the Buddha grew up in Kapilavastu. And when the Buddha, of course, the story is the Buddha left and he, became a monk and enlightened and all that, but his father was still, going on. His mother passed away. And so his father then married his mother's younger sister, which would have been the Buddha's aunt, right? So his father marries his mother's younger sister and then has a daughter with that wife, whose name was Sundari Nanda, which means beautiful, beautiful Nanda. And then he had a son who was Nanda. So there was the son and the older sister. And so they were both, she was a half sister of the Buddha and Nanda was a half brother of the Buddha. And Nanda was really sexually attracted to his older sister. And in those times, the intermarrying to keep the bloodlines going was a thing that was done. So there was this plan to actually have Nanda marry his older sister. And, Nanda was just, had incredible attachment for her. So the Buddha is invited, there's going to be the wedding, and the Buddha is invited back to the palace, and they're having dinner, and the wedding hasn't occurred yet. And the Buddha takes his begging bowl and on the table and he puts it next to Nanda, and then the Buddha gets up and walks away and goes out into the woods. And Nanda figures, he's telling me something, why did he give me the bowl? So Nanda gets up and he goes out and he follows the Buddha out into the woods. And the Buddha says, do you want to become a monk? Do you want to follow me? And Nanda says, yes, but I have such incredible attachment for my older sister that, I don't think I can do that. So the Buddha decides to show him something. So the Buddha takes him kind of on this journey through waveforms and frequencies. And he, on the way to, he's taking him up to the God realms. He's taking him up to the God realms. And on the way to the God realms, they pass by on a mountain a female monkey who has been in some kind of fire, and her tail is charred, her nose is burnt, and her ears are burnt off. And she's grabbing onto a charred stump. And Nanda notices this as they're going on the way to the God realms. So they get to the God realms, and the Buddha shows him what's going on in these God realms. And he's looking at all the beautiful goddesses, and Nanda's tongue is hanging on his foot, right? So he's looking at all these beautiful goddesses, and the Buddha says to him, so which are more beautiful? Which is more beautiful, your sister or the monkey? And he says, oh, my sister's more beautiful than the monkey. He says, well, look at these goddesses. Who are more beautiful, these goddesses or your sister? And he says, these goddesses are far more beautiful than my sister. So the Buddha says, would you like to be born here? And he said, yeah. So the Buddha says, yes, well, you can be reborn here, but it takes a huge amount of ethics. And you're going to have to study with me in order to be reborn in this realm. So he goes, okay, I'll do it. So he forgoes, marrying his sister so that he can study with the Buddha so that he could go to a God realm and have all of these goddesses to play with. So so he's studying, he's working with the Buddha, and the other monks are just making fun of him because they know that he's just doing this so he can go to a God realm. And so Nanda isn't getting very far in his studies at all. He's not really progressing. So the Buddha then decides he's going to show him something else. So the Buddha then takes him on a journey through the waveforms and frequencies and brings him to a hell realm, a lower realm. And Nanda looks at this and he says, what is this? What causes this? And the Buddha says, severe attachment and the afflictive emotions that arise due to it. So then the Buddha says, yes, if you develop your ethics enough, you can go to a God realm and you can have all these times. But what you're going to do is just spend all of your time just engaging in sense pleasure. And what's going to happen is all that positive karma that you had gained is going to be gone. You'll have used it up. And what will happen is you will automatically go to a lower realm like this because you have no positive karma left. And so this really shook Nanda out of it. And then he applied himself and actually became a good monk and worked on it. So that's the story of Nanda, which shows the skillful way that an enlightened being can show someone who has that kind of problem what the outcome will be ultimately of that kind of attachment and the afflictive emotions that arise from it. And it's a good lesson to learn, because there's certainly people I know that we could try something like that. Of course, we can't take them through waveforms and show them what would happen, but there are,
That's the point. That's why you have to be a Buddha.
that's why we have to be a Buddha. That's why we have to be a Buddha. That is the point. That's why we want to be a Buddha, folks. But you can see, I mean, these seem like extreme stories, but you can apply them to examples that we all know, and you can see that it's, you can see the value of this, of being a Buddha. So the next story, oh yeah, this is a touching story. This is the story of the ugly son. And when I was reading this story, I was going, how could this kid be so ugly that all of these things are happening to him? So I want to show you what ran across my mind was, I don't know if you all remember this, there was a movie called The Elephant Man. It was about John Merrick. I just want to show you a picture of John Merrick so you can see. Now, I'm not saying that this ugly son had this disease, but whatever the disease was that the ugly son had, it had to be something like this for the things to occur in this story the way they did. So I'm going to share the screen and just show you a picture of John Merrick so you can get an idea. You see that? So what you can see here, look at the eye. Yeah, I'll show you a picture. You got it? So if you can see that one eye that's open, you can see there's a person there. You can see there's an actual, human guy there. But this disease, this elephantitis, took him over so that he became a freak in the circus, and ultimately people couldn't even stand to be around him. The touching thing, I'll stop the share. The touching thing about that story is that John Merrick was a very sensitive and intelligent guy underneath all of that. And there was a doctor that was able to help him. So here's the story of the ugly son. There was a wealthy family that was expecting a child. And when the child was born, it was noticed that this child was not easy to look at. It was ugly. And the parents were shocked and they didn't know what to do. And as the child grew, the child got uglier. So if you think of it, something like elephantitis, you could see, I mean, oh my God, there are more pictures of elephantitis where they actually look like elephants. You can't even recognize the person's face. So at one point, the son was getting so ugly that the father wanted to kill him, and do it quietly, but just to kill the child. And the mother says, we're just going to raise him in secret. Nobody should see him. We're not allowed to kill our child. Because the mother would have known, just like this doctor knew with John Merrick, that there was an actual sensitive being, under that deformity. So when the son was old enough to leave, not that young, I mean, could have been 10 or 12. The parents sent him out of the house, and they gave him just the bare necessities to survive. And like a monk, he was given a begging bowl and a walking stick to take with him on his way. And it was, very painful for the boy, and he grieved a lot. Not only that he had to leave his mother and father, but because of his appearance, people were avoiding him, they were afraid of him, and he suffered a lot because of his situation. And he wondered what terrible karma he must be carrying to have endured so much pain and suffering. Whenever he tried to beg for something to eat, the people he met chased him away. They threw stones and dirt at him. And he was even beaten by people who were frightened by him. So he lived the life of a beggar with no chance of recovery. So he began to hide in the forest because it was so bad. People were attacking him. And he'd go out of his little primitive dwelling that he made in the forest. He'd go out into the streets at night, and he'd search through the garbage for, old clothes and old food, and he would take them back. So during one of these night excursions, this ugly boy met the Buddha. And the Buddha saw he could see the Buddha nature of the boy. He could see through the young man. He could see with different eyes who this boy was, and he could see all of the karma involved. So the Buddha appeared to him as someone who was even uglier than the boy, who had the same condition but was older. It was worse. It was much worse, right? So the boy, so he did this so he could establish a connection with the boy. So the Buddha did this, and the boy was frightened when he saw the Buddha, and he wanted to run away from the Buddha, just as other people always ran away from him. So, but the Buddha shouted for him to stop, and the boy stopped, and slowly he went back to them. And now the Buddha, the ugly Buddha, started to complain to the ugly boy about his supposed suffering. He says, people are afraid of me. They run away when they see me. Some hit me. They insult me. They spit at me. And the boy said, this is exactly the way it's been for me. I understand you so well. Maybe we can stay together. Maybe we could be friends. So that's what they did. That's what the Buddha did with him. And the Buddha had already made preparations for this, and he brought some food, and he gave the boy some food, and they started, and they had a conversation. And the boy began to feel secure with the Buddha, and he felt like he was no longer alone. He'd found a friend. He felt happiness for the first time in his life, and he was satisfied in that moment. So in the story, then, it says at that moment, then the Buddha suddenly transforms back into the Buddha as he was. And he tells the boy that everything in the universe is subject to the laws of cause and effect, the laws of karma. And the ugly boy, when he heard this, said he immediately wanted to become a disciple of the Buddha. Can I be your disciple? Can I take refuge? And the Buddha said, yes, you can do that. And so they say that the ugly boy became somewhat less ugly. I mean, simply because of his countenance, he was more relaxed, and he became less ugly. He did become a monk. The monks accepted him. He had realizations on the path. And it turns out that the karma that he was suffering from had to do with, he was a very miserly and deceitful person in his last life. And so he appeared one way to people, but underneath he was ugly. He was not being kind to people. He was taking advantage of them. And so he had this life where he outwardly appeared ugly. And so that when he understood that karma, he was able to deal with it and continue. And again, he had realizations, got out of that lifetime, had a better rebirth, and so on. And I thought that was a pretty touching story for anyone who has a sense of low self-esteem, anybody who has a real sense of low self-esteem, that this can be overcome, you know, to understand that it is due to karma. The reason it's happening is due to karma. And if you understand that, and sort of then follow the path, take refuge, work on getting realizations and stick with it, you know, you will overcome that. You know, the self-esteem will go, the low self-esteem will go away, and you will have a better sense of who you are. Then let's see, the last story I think we'll do. Now, this is the one Kavita was talking about. This is the story of Devadatta. 1221. Well, then we'll just end with this story. This is about his brother Devadatta, and this is another of the qualities of the Buddha, is that they have equal compassion for everybody. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter if the person doesn't like them or not. It's not at all to the Buddha. They have equal compassion. So here's a story. This stories of Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin. Devadatta was the Buddha's cousin, and he was also the brother of the Buddha's wife when the Buddha had been married before he left the palace. So Devadatta entered the order of Buddhist monks at the same time as the other members of the Shakya clan entered the order of the Buddhist monks when Shakyamuni, you know, when the prince Siddhartha became Shakyamuni Buddha. And Devadatta applied himself to the practice, but he became frustrated because he was not making progress toward becoming an arhat. He wanted to become an arhat. He wanted to be liberated from cyclic existence, but he wasn't gaining any progress. So instead, he decided what he wanted to do was he would apply his practice toward developing supernatural powers to be very impressive, you know, to people. So he began to become very jealous of the Buddha. Devadatta did. And Devadatta believed that he should be the high one, the world honored big chief, you know, that everybody was praising. So he got into favor with one of the king's sons. There was a king. It wasn't the same king as Angulimala. This guy was called King Bimbisara, and he was a patron of the Buddha. And the king's son didn't like that, because the king didn't like seeing that his father was spending so much money and attention on the Buddha, when what the son really was after is he wanted to be the king. The son wanted to be the king. So Devadatta also wanted to get rid of the Buddha. So they sort of went into cahoots together and said, you know, you can kill your father, and you can help me kill the Buddha, and you can be king, and I can be the head of this whole big monastery and the big cheese. So they sort of joined forces, and they tried several things. And this is where it does remind me of the coyote trying to get the roadrunner, because there's one instance where they built this mechanical kind of device. There was a huge boulder that was up at the top of a hill. And I think there's even a coyote picture where he's trying to get a boulder off a cliff to get the roadrunner, right? So they wanted to get this boulder to run down, as the Buddha was walking down the street of this village, the boulder to come down and get the Buddha. Of course, they get the boulder to run down the hill, but you know, of course, the Buddha's omniscient, and the boulder completely misses the Buddha, and he just keeps walking. So then they do this other thing where they decide that there's this elephant that's sort of known to be kind of a mad, crazy elephant. And so they drugged this elephant to get him just like wild and crazy. And that what they wanted to do was to release this elephant when the Buddha was, again, in the village, walking the streets, and the elephant would come charging out of wherever pen they kept him in, and would just run over the Buddha, because this is what the elephants did when he just destroyed everything in its path when it was in one of these mad rages. So they let the elephant out, and the elephant is like destroying things, and all the people are running up onto the rooftops to escape from the elephant. The Buddha's just sort of walking down the street. And the elephant comes to the Buddha and sort of stops, and then just kneels down, you know, and in honor of the Buddha. And there are many paintings of this, and there are also these relief sculptures, these ancient relief sculptures showing this elephant kneeling to the Buddha, and that's that particular story. So that was, you know, foiled again. So then Devadatta hires a bunch of assassins, right? He's going to have the Buddha murdered. So he hires an assassin to kill the Buddha. Then he hires, to cover his tracks, he hires an assassin to kill the assassin. Then he hires another assassin to kill the other assassin. So none of it could be traced. It's like very mafia stuff. So none of it works. All of these assassins are just like, oh, I want to join your order. They're just, just really impressed by the Buddha. So nothing worked for Devadatta. And finally, he was sick and on his deathbed, and he wanted forgiveness. He sent a letter for the Buddha to come and to visit him, and he wanted forgiveness, but he died before the letter could reach the Buddha. So the story of what this is saying is that a Buddha is, and I mentioned this last week, is omniscient but not omnipotent. A Buddha cannot override our karma. And they say that a Buddha's omniscience is about on the same level as a person's karma. I mean, in terms of the power, there's only so much a Buddha can do. And if a person is like Devadatta, and we talked about this last week also, if it's like an overturned pot, the sun may be shining everywhere, but the pot's overturned. So the sun doesn't get into the pot. It doesn't reach the plant. It doesn't help the plant to grow because the pot is shut from the sun. And we can be like that a lot of times with one another. And all kinds of, because like my pot is over my head. I'm not listening to what you're saying. I don't like you, blah, 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 right there. And so this was the problem with Devadatta. And the only thing that can be done is to take the pot off our heads, to realize we need to see, we're not correct about everything. And to take the pot off our heads.
The moral of the story is take the pot off.
Take the pot. I mean, this happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was out painting our new porch pickets, and there are hundreds of them, and it's just a stinky job. And it was really, really hot, and we're still not done yet. It was still not done yet, right? And I'm just like, really just in this pissed off mood with the paint sitting in the sun doing this and all that. So Kavita comes along, right? And she says, I have some umbrellas here. I can just move them up the stairs and you'll have some shade. No, I don't want umbrellas. It was just like an overturned pot, right? So even though my pot was overturned, Kavita was very kind and she set up the umbrellas and it was much, much better. It was cooler. There was a breeze. I was in the shade. I could paint. I wasn't as pissed off. And I realized, and I told Vita, I said, well, I was like an overturned pot there. And but this, this happens. It happens to us all the time. So that's kind of the lesson there is don't let our own stubbornness get in the way of help and guidance that we could receive. And we never know who a Buddha is because a Buddha can take on any appearance. So to sort of be aware of that. Well, we didn't get to much else, but I'm glad I got through the stories. Next time we'll.
So again, explain why the stories are important.
Their stories are important because it shows you why we want to become a Buddha, how we can help, what it means, to have. I'll go back over these qualities. I'll just reiterate the qualities. A Buddhas are free from all fears, free from fear of samsara, free from fear of nirvana. The Buddhas have skillful and effective means to free all others from fear, which are what those stories are. They're showing skillful and effective means to free somebody who is benightedly ignorant, someone who has huge amount of anger and vicious, someone who has a lot of attachment like Nanda, someone who is low self-esteem like the ugly boy. And but if we're an overturned pot, there's only so much a Buddha can do. But the Buddhas do have equal compassion. The Buddha had equal compassion for Devadatta as he did for his own disciples. And then the final quality, there's five. Yeah, the final quality is the Buddhas fulfill the aims of all beings. So no matter who we are, no matter how we act, whether we have faith or not, whether we have high or noble rank, whether we're in the gutter, it has no bearing upon the Buddha's ability to guide us, which you can kind of see from those stories. A Buddha doesn't lack the patience to stick with it. Buddhas don't teach us only if we're nice to them and then kick us out as soon as we're, obnoxious. And this is an important quality for us to look for when we're looking for our guides. You know, I would say somebody like Geshe Nima definitely has these qualities. Geshe Drapa for sure had these qualities. So this is what we're looking for in a guide. And it's an important quality to develop in ourselves so that we become more able to help others, so that we're not biased, you know. And this is something we want to strive for, because we want to become like this. We want to become an enlightened being. So these stories are a way of helping us see how we could perhaps react. Yeah, we can't, you know, affect the waveforms yet, but you know, we can think about that and think, how can we help, and not react in such bad ways, and not be overturned pots, you know, and you know, learn from those stories. So next week we will I'll talk about some of the differences between Theravada and Mahayana, and I'll go into the actual qualities of the Buddha's body and the qualities of the Buddha's speech, and how those, particularly the ones with the speech, how we can begin to try and start modeling, see if we can do that a little bit, and it will help us towards, you know, on our path to enlightenment, if we can start to alter our speech, which is difficult to do. I mean, our speech is very habitual, but it's worth looking at. So let's say some closing prayers. Any questions about anything before we close? The stories are a little bit easier to you know, follow.
Where do you find the stories, Christopher?
Well, the stories were, I remember Lama Pasang told these stories. Thupten Chodron told these stories, but they were very sketchy. So I knew the names of who the people were and all that stuff. So I just went online, and Wikipedia has, and some other sites, they have these stories and they have the details of these stories. So that's where I found those details, you know. Well, I don't think you do a picture book of all the finger necklaces. And yeah.
Why not?
Why not? You don't want to give kids any ideas. It could be kind of scary, actually, but I don't know. Maybe. I mean, at a certain age, of course, they could do. Oh yeah, that's true. If you think about some of the fairy tales, you know, you're right, Teresa. Teresa's saying some of those Brothers Grimm's tales, the Grimm fairy tales, they are grim. They are frightening. I mean, Hansel and Gretel, the witch throwing them into the fiery oven. Hello, that's scary stuff. Yeah, yeah, I know. So, well, that's a good point, Teresa.
Remember how the kids loved it when you told them the Aztecs pulled out their hearts while they were still beating?
Oh my God,
They loved that shit.
we did when we Save had our group, our music group, we were doing a concert at some church, and they asked us to do a sort of presentation for the kids. And so we were you know, doing the music, and I was explaining, you know, about the Aztecs, the Aztec culture, and some of the music we were doing. And I was telling the kids about when the Aztecs would, you know, sacrifice victims and pull their hearts out of their chest, and the kids were like, they were like hanging on every word. So, you know, it gets kids' attention anyway. I'm not sure I had a good moral though
Anyway,
with it.
moving along.
Okay, moving along. Dedication prayers. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the enlightened state of the Buddha, so that we may liberate all sentient beings from suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Okay, thank you guys. And see you all next time. You want to stop the recording?
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank
Okay.
you, Christopher.